doing? I'm CK with Under Pressure Performance, and today we're going to be installing one of our twin turbo kits on this GMC Sierra. Now, this is a second generation GMC Sierra, which is 2007 to 2013. This kit will fit on any of those. It'll fit on the Silverados, the Suburbans, and it should fit on the Cadillac Escalades as well. So this covers the whole second generation of them. So we're going to go ahead and get started, and let's start going at it. All right, now before we start our teardown, for those of you guys that are going to be doing it at home, we are going to be draining the AC system, so you'll want to take it to a certified AC facility where they can actually drain and recover the AC on it, and we'll be changing out some lines on that. That way you're not bleeding it off into the atmosphere at your house. All right, so first thing we're going to start with is going to be the teardown of the vehicle and the disassembly. We need to basically make room for the turbos and the turbo systems, the intercooler and all that, so what we're going to do is start getting rid of all of the factory stuff that we don't need and start removing things so we have access. So we're going to pull off the front grill assembly here. That's going to give us access to where we can put our intercooler on there. We're going to take off the exhaust manifolds just to the mid-pipe section there. Of course, the intake and the air box that was in here is going to come out. And then the AC line that we're going to be removing is the one right here going down to the AC compressor down here. At this time we want to go ahead and drain the radiator as well, because we're going to be removing both of these two coolant lines here that went to our heater core up here, and then we're going to be disconnecting the main coolant line a little bit later, and we're basically going to be clearing out the area over in here on both sides, so that way we've got enough room, because our turbos are going to mount right in here. Alright, we're also going to go ahead and remove the fender liners here, the little plastic shroud coverings. That's going to give us a lot better access to access all of the engine up in here, especially when doing the manifolds and that, both with removing the factory ones. This actually clears it up where you got a lot of space to work. So we're going to do that on both sides just to free up some extra room. Alright, we're also going to go ahead and remove all of the spark plug wires and the coils. Those are going to get relocated a little bit later, and we're going to be kind of shifting them around as far as how they fit in there. So you can see we just took the whole coil pack assembly clean right off the valve cover here. And then we also we're going to switch the valve covers. The valve covers are kind of the same for both sides, except the oil fill cap sits right here. So we're going to transition that to the other side, so the oil fill cap is actually going to be in the rear on the driver's side now, instead of up here on the front. The valve covers basically just swap them and they bolt right up just the same as if they went there originally. Alright, now to take a look at the wiring, the turbo itself is going to sit right in here, and from the factory the wiring is coming out of our ECU fuse box right here, and it's coming straight across, going just behind the alternator and then going back alongside the engine. It's got enough slack on it, and it's this big mass of wires here, so what I'm going to do is actually lift it up and tuck it right here behind the brake master cylinder reservoir, so that way it comes out of the fuse box assembly here, tucks around behind there, and then just kind of hugs right along the firewall there out of the way. This is our connector for our coil pack assembly, which is going to be going over in here later. And then we have this other pigtail here coming off of the main wire harness assembly, and that's the one that normally shoots and drops and goes right down here, just behind the alternator, and it's going to actually a lot of the sensors over on the passenger side. Cut. So for this section of pigtail coming off here, this section of wires we're going to need to extend. There's about 12 wires in this loom here, and it's the one that drops right down and is going, like I said, underneath the engine towards the other side to hit the sensors that are over there. We need to extend each of the wires by about 48 inches, so 4 foot long. So it's easiest if you do it just one at a time. Clip the wire, extend one wire, solder it together, heat shrink it, and just do it one at a time and make them each 4 foot longer. So we're just extending this so we have a lot more length in here to play with. If you do it one at a time, you really can't mess up the wires and get them crossed up and confused. So what we're going to do then is we're going to take this loom here, we're going to slide it right along the same with the existing wire loom here. It's going to shoot, you can see it dropping straight down here and going right in behind the power steering pump where it originated from. So again, all we did is really extend that and bring that over here. The other one that we're going to need to extend is going to be the coolant temp sensor. Now, the coolant temp sensor originally is in this location right here on the driver's side front head. The heads are actually also symmetrical, so it is now getting relocated to the passenger side rear of the head. And this one here is just 2 wires, and then you can see we've already got it loomed up here. The 2-wire connection, and it also comes out of this harness that's got the 12 wires in it that we're going to be extending. So we're going to break that one out of that harness there, and we're just basically going to keep it up here out of the way from our turbos and our heat that are here, and we're going to wrap that around towards the back side of the engine and plug it into the coolant temp sensor that we relocated. All right, we're going to also extend some stuff right up here. The wires, the two wires here going to the alternator, those are going to need to be extended by about 12 inches, and then right about 6 inches for both the injectors number 1 and 2 on this side here, or sorry, correctly that would be injectors 1 and 3, but the first 2 injectors on the driver's side, we're going to extend those about 6 inches. The other thing we're going to need to actually go ahead and completely replace is going to be the main hot power wire coming off the back of the alternator. Now originally that goes down to this side right here, and it goes to this junction box. And it just went to this terminal lead here, and that's how it would feed power back to the battery when it's charging it. We're going to go ahead and pull this off just to remove it completely. The short wire that goes from this junction terminal to the alternator, go ahead and pull that off. We're going to remove that and discard it. And then we're going to replace it with this 8-gauge wire here, and this is going to be supplied with the kit. This will actually come from the back of the alternator. It's going to loop back all the way around, and we're going to come right back up to the battery here. If you actually pull the bolt out, you can slide this shield off, and then it's just the eyelets under here. We're going to slide that up inside of there, so that way it connects back up to the battery. That's how our alternator is going to continue to charge our battery. Now we're going to be left with the terminal from the factory, the big 4-gauge wire here that's going from the battery. It goes underneath to the starter over there. It comes through here, and it had a little terminal that splices off of it. It's actually a continuous wire that they crimped it around. What we're going to do very carefully is cut the terminal off of the wire itself. So use a die grinder cutoff wheel, and you're just going to really lightly squirt. Now you want to be careful so you don't actually cut into the wires or cut through the wires themselves. All you're trying to do is remove the terminal, and it's actually, they basically just stripped a section of the wire out and they crimped it around that wire. What we want to do is cut those crimps so it comes off, and what's going to be left when we're done is basically just bare copper wire. There's going to be about 2-3 inches that are exposed. Now we need to wrap that up. We'll go ahead and wrap that up with electrical tape and some heat shrink. Heat shrink, if you slice it open and then wrap it back around, if you get it hot enough, it will actually melt back to itself. It's very, very important that you get that very, very sealed up in there. We don't want that arcing to anything. It is very dangerous if that does ground out on anything. So we want to make sure that you got a good seal on there. When you're done, you want to use some good wire loom over the top of that, and then you want to wrap that up in electrical tape or the cloth tape as well, just because we really want to protect it. It is a big fire hazard if that grounds out, because there's no fused protection and it's going directly to the battery. So it's important that we really, really seal that up. All right, now that we've got our wires relocated now that way, we want to go ahead and start heat wrapping everything to kind of keep it really nice and protected. Having the turbos up in the engine bay is going to produce a little bit extra heat, especially right next to where the turbos are. So basically anything that's going to be near them or in that area, we're going to go ahead and wrap up with heat wrap. Now you can see we've got a start on it here. Basically our power steering lines that are coming from here, going down to the power steering pump. We still have to wrap this one here. And then we've got our electrical loom here, and our 2 main power wires. This is again underneath this one is where we took that splice out and then insulated it real well. We want to wrap that up again with another layer to keep it extra protected and keep the heat away from it now. Basically the turbo is going to be sitting right here, and the downpipe is going to kind of loop back and out. Anything that's going to be near it at all, we want to really, really protect it. So this main electrical harness up here, we're going to come back, we're going to go ahead and wrap that all up in heat wrap as well, so that's nice and protected out of the way. You can see we got started on it over here. The alternator wire up here. Basically anything in this area that could be susceptible to heat damage that's either rubber, plastic, or wires, we want to go ahead and wrap that up and take care of it. Alright, next up what we're going to do is go after the oil return. Now we're feeding the turbos oil, so we're going to need to get that oil back out and back into the pan. So for that what we're going to do is cut a hole in the pan. We're going to use this roto-cut arbor bit. It's a special hole saw bit that instead of when you drill a hole get a bunch of fine shavings and having those go all into your pan, this is actually specially designed to create really big shavings that come off of it to keep it from going in your pan. So what you want to do is you want to drill really slow with it. So what you want to do, the pan is about 1/4 of an inch thick, so start drilling on it until you get pretty good depth in it. You don't want to actually punch all the way through. And what we want to do is saturate this bit in grease. So we're going to just take it in like bearing axle grease, we'll dip it in there so it's completely saturated and covered, and that way when we start cutting through that last little bit, it's actually all of the metal shavings and that it creates that could go into the pan are going to get caught up and stuck on here. There is also a spring when you guys will first receive this in here, and that's to eject the plug. Take the spring out before you drill it, because we don't want to accidentally eject the plug in the inside of the pan. We want the plug to come out. So just basically, like I said, glue this up in a bunch of axle grease, and then we're going to drill right into the pan. Now, where we're going in the pan is going to be right up here on the passenger side in the very front corner. You can see we've already got the hole drilled. And what we're going to do is pull this plastic electronics down out of the way of the wiring, and that'll give us enough room right up in here to get a drill up in there and go ahead and drill through and punch that hole there. And like I said, drill really slow, and you want to use a lot of grease. Once we get that drilled, we're going to come back with a 1/2 inch NPT, that's National Pipe Thread tap, and we're going to go ahead and tap that. Okay, now here's a slightly better view. You can see it straight on of the hole that we're going into the oil pan there, and you can see we're targeting more towards the bottom of it because there is that oil pan bolt right there, and we need to make sure that when we're done there's enough room for the hex part of this fitting here to screw in there, and that we won't actually be interfering with that bolt. So we don't want to go down all the way into the very bottom of it, but you can see we're about 1/4 of an inch away from the very bottom where it starts to angle here, so just a hair up from that, and that'll give us a little bit more room. So we're steering clear of that bolt to make sure that this fitting will completely screw in there when we're done, and we won't run into problems with it banging against that bolt. Alright, now the 1/2 inch tap that we're going to be using to tap the hole in the pan, we're going to do the same thing we did with the rotor broach. So we're just going to dip this and saturate it completely in axle grease. That way it's nice and sticky and gooey. So any of the metal shavings, as we're cutting through it, are going to actually end up sticking to it. Just as a safety precaution, when we get done, we're also going to go ahead and drain the oil. So any metal shavings that may have gotten down in there should come out when you drain the oil on it, and then just basically do a fresh oil change. Now it is important to note with the NPT taps, they are tapered. So as you screw it in more, the hole actually gets bigger. It enlarges as it goes in. So you don't want to just take this thing and just run it all the way through, because then your fitting is actually going to go in and just be nice and sloppy, and there it won't actually create a good seal. So what we want to do is just, it's going to vary differently between the different taps that you use. So what you want to do is start it, get it going in, cut a few threads in it, back it off, take your fitting and test your fitting in there to make sure it's not overly tight. What you ideally want to do is get about halfway down the fitting screwed in before it becomes snug, and then that way it gives you the last half of the fitting that you can really crank down and tighten it up, and then especially once we add Teflon tape to this to really create a seal on it. So again, do not just drill this thing all the way in there. You will make the hole bigger. The deeper it goes, the bigger the hole will go. So you want to just go do a few turns in it, test it out, do a few turns. Take your time, because if you end up drilling the hole too big, the end result is pretty much you have to pull your oil pan, and nobody really wants to do that. Alright, now that we've got the hole drilled and tapped in there, we're going to go ahead and install our fitting. And it's this one here, it's the 1/2 inch NPT to a 10 AN fitting straight. And we're just going to go ahead and, the NPT sides will get Teflon tape. Anything that's flared with the AN fitting, which has got this angle on it here, does not get Teflon tape. The Teflon will actually help prevent it from sealing. So do not use Teflon on this side. The NPT side, we will use Teflon. So we're going to go ahead and wrap that up. We'll go ahead and get it installed. Alright, now you can see we've got our 10 AN fitting installed in here. And you can see, like it said, it clears the nut up above there. Now this plastic piece here that we pulled down, we're going to trim off this plastic clip just on this side right here. So we're going to use some dikes and go ahead and cut this off. And then once we actually install our oil return line on here, we'll go ahead and zip tie that up out of the way so it's attached to our oil return line. That way it's not sitting down here dragging on anything in our steering area. But that's basically what our oil return looks like right there. And then we'll tap into that a little bit later when we actually run the oil lines. Alright, next thing we're going to go after is going to be the coil pack assemblies. Now the coil packs come mounted to this bracket here, and basically what we're going to do is just unbolt the coil packs from each side, all 8 of them, from these 2 brackets. And the kit is going to come with this coil holder heat shield here, and basically each of the coils is just going to bolt right up to it. Now the sub-assembly harness that goes to the coil packs, we're going to go ahead and route up on the inside here, so that way it's underneath, and then there's a slot cut out right here where the wiring goes through. So when you get done, it should look like this. The coils are going to basically just bolt up. They use the existing bolts here, and then we're going to use the M6 nuts on the back side here. So we'll go ahead and bolt these up to the coil pack shield like this, and then we'll go ahead and get this mounted in the car. All right, now before we mount the coil heat shield, it's going to sit right on top of our intake manifold here. This line here was part of the PCV system. We're going to go ahead and put a vacuum cap on that, close that off, and it's good to put a zip tie on it, help keep it from blowing off. The evap is right here. Now we're going to go ahead and disconnect the electrical wiring on it as well as the hose. We don't want it connected anymore because we don't want the boost pressure going in and actually pressurizing the fuel tank. So we're basically just going to disconnect it and then leave the other end disconnected as a vent. The electrical here side of it for the evap, the codes are going to come on because it's disconnected. That's going to need to be deleted later on in the ECU during the tune. And then this line right here, again part of the PCV system, this one here is now going to be what's going to go to our blow-off valve. So we're going to go ahead and connect a hose to this first before we cover it up, and then just drape the hose outside here. That way we've got it later for when we need to connect to the blow-off valve. Now, if you're going to be running a boost gauge or anything like that, this is also the line that you're going to want to tap to. So just T-tap into that and run it to whatever else you need to. That needs a boost and a vacuum reference source. Also at this time, if you're going to be switching out the map sensor, doing like a 2-bar speed density tune on it, the map sensor right here, we want to go ahead and switch that out as well. Now, one final step that we're going to do before we put on the coil cover is go ahead and install the injectors as well, because that's going to kind of cover those up. Injectors pretty simple and basic to install. Just unbolt the fuel rail, lift it up, slide the old injectors out, the new ones in, bolt it down, and you're good to go. All right, now that we've got the coils mounted, we're going to go ahead and mount the entire coil assembly right here. It's just going to go on top of the intake manifold. We're going to use 4 M6 1.0 by 16 millimeter long nuts, along with the M6 washers, and that's basically just going to bolt into place just like that, and that's going to hold our coils as well as act as kind of a heat shield to protect some of the stuff from under here from some of the heat. All right, next what we're going to do is go ahead and build our spark plug wires. Now the kit's going to come with spark plug wires that are custom length. That way you can kind of route them however you want. We'll give you our specifications as what we recommend and how to route them. Really, it's up to you. They're long enough you can kind of route them a bunch of different ways. So for this kit here, we're going to need spark plug wire lengths of 45, 40, 35, and 30 inches. There's going to be a pair of each, so 2 45s, 2 40s, 2 35s, and 2 30s. That gives you one for each side. You want to start with the longest spark plug wire first. Now, to see how to install this or how to build the spark plug wires, go ahead and refer to our how-to spark plug wire video right here, and that'll walk you through how to do it, and then we'll go ahead and show you how they go in the truck. All right, next thing we're going to do is go ahead and install the manifolds, and they're pretty straightforward and easy. You just slide them in, bolt them up just like the factory ones came off. You're going to reuse the same bolts. Now, for the gasket part of it, you can either reuse the factory gasket, or what we recommend is actually silicone. That's not RTV sealant, but actual silicone, 100% pure silicone. You can get it at Home Depot or Lowe's. Just basically silicone caulking. It's made from silica sand, so it's actually got a higher melting point than the steel does. And what we want to do with that is not use the gaskets. We're going to use just silicone. It actually holds up a lot better than the gaskets do over time. A lot of times the heat, when stress, will actually blow the gaskets out of there. We have yet to have a leak with the silicone at all. Now, the silicone's not structural, so you don't want to just goop it on there or cover up any gaps with it, but for actually making a seal, it does a great job. So you want to put just a really, really light layer and a light film bead on here. Again, do not just glob it on there and smear it on. What will end up happening is when you bolt it on, it'll squeeze in, and the silicone will actually squeeze inside of the runners. Eventually, over time, it'll wear and break off and go through the turbos, and that's not good for the turbos. So you want to put a really, really light film layer around each of the runner tubes, and then just bolt it on just like normal. All right, now here you can see we've got the header installed. This is the passenger side, and then this is kind of the routing that we're going for with the spark plug wires. Is they're going to shoot 90 degrees backwards towards the firewall, and they're going to loop right around the back side of the head. And then if we come down here, you can see, oop, I got one off there. They're just going to loop right up onto the plugs just like that. And so they're going to kind of droop down and head away from the headers and just right around the back side of the head like that. All right, now to prep the turbos for install, we're going to need to loosen them up so that way they're clockable. Now there's 6 bolts right here on the compressor housing, and there's another 6 bolts here on the turbine housing. Just crack those loose. That way the 3 pieces here spin independently of each other. That way we can position everything once we get it in the car where it needs to be. Because once we get it in the car, the oil feed here is going to need to be basically completely vertical. We want it sitting straight up and down like this. You don't want it cocked off at an angle. In addition to that, we're going to go ahead and set up the oil feed and return lines. So this is an 1/8 inch NPT fitting to a -4 adapter. that's going to screw right into the top of the turbo. Now the NPT side, again, on the bottom where it screws into the turbo, you're going to need to use a little bit of sealant or Teflon tape. On the bottom side of the turbo, we have this 2-bolt to -10 oil return flange. Go ahead and use a little bit of RTV gasket sealant on the bottom side of that, and then bolt that on. That's where oil is going to drain back into the pan from. And lastly is going to be the 5-bolt adapter here that goes on the back side of the turbo for our downpipe. This converts it from our 5-bolt flange over to a V-band flange. So we're going to go ahead and bolt this up with 5 M8 by 125 20mm long bolts. Just smear a light layer again of silicone, not RTV sealant on this one. This one's going to be pure silicone. Smear a little light layer on that, bolt that on, and then we're going to use the same light layer of silicone for the T3 flange here when we bolt this to the manifold. So now that we've got these prepped and they've got all the components added to them and they're clockable so they're loose, we're going to go ahead and bolt them in the truck. That way we can get everything lined up and clocked into place where it needs to be. Alright, you can see we've got the turbos mounted and installed in here. And the -4 oil feed line right here on the top. And then the -10 oil plate return is coming out the bottom. And again, if you look at it from the front, that is directly vertical. We don't want that at an angle at all. We're just going to bolt that right up to the manifold with the 4 M10 1.5 by 25mm long bolts, and both of the turbos are mounted and installed. Now to install the TurboSmart wastegates, we're going to go ahead and prep those before we put them on. We're going to install the 2 nipples as well as the 2 plugs. And if you look at it from the front with the output facing down, they're going to be on the right-hand side there. The one that's most important is going to be the bottom nipple here. That's the only one that we're actually going to really use, and that's the one that when boost pressure is applied to it, it opens the wastegate and prevents it from boosting further. The only time you're going to use the top one is if you're using a 3-port boost solenoid with like an electronic boost controller. It does come with the nipples, that way you've got it there if you are using that, but most of you guys are just going to be using the bottom one. For the top one, you can either put the nipple in it or you can leave it out, but whatever you do, do not plug both of the top ports. Also, make sure you do not have either of the bottom ports unplugged. One of them needs a nipple in it, and then the other one is going to need a plug in it. Alright, we're also going to need to install the fire ring. The fire ring just basically slips into the bottom of it like that. And when you look at it, it should protrude out the bottom slightly. That way when you push it on, it's actually going to put pressure on it and it's going to seat down against the turbo manifold. That's what helps create the seal. That fire ring is what actually seals against the valve inside of here, and without that, you're not going to build any boost. These basically just slide right over, and then the V-band clamp on like that. Now it is important to note with the V-band clamp, there's 2 sides to it and they look slightly different. This one does not have a machined edge cut out on it. This is where the bolt side is going to go with the Allen head. This side here you can see a slight machining cutout. That's where the nut goes. They machine that cutout on there, that way you have enough room to slip your socket down to tighten up the nut. Alright, now you can see we've got the wastegate installed. Basically just connects right up to the manifold there. And we went ahead and attached the dump tube as well. The straight dump tube is going to be over here on the passenger side. The 90-degree one goes over on the driver's side. So this one's just coming and shooting straight off of the wastegate. And it's just going to dump right up here into the wheel well area. We want to make sure it's not pointed directly at the tire or the brakes or anything like that. Alright, now over here for the driver's side, you can see we've got the wastegate installed to the manifold right there. And we went ahead and put on the dump tube, which is going to be the 90-degree bend. So this wastegate is actually going to be facing backwards towards the rear of the vehicle, and then the 90-degree bend hooks and turns it and points it, again, right out here in the wheel well area, out the side. And again, we don't want to point it directly at the brakes or the tires or anything like that. Now some of these wires and hoses here we're going to need to zip tie up out of the way, as well as the power steering line that's coming right down through here. We're going to need to bend that and tweak that over so it sits a little bit closer to the brake master cylinder. We're going to want it right up against it. That's going to give us enough clearance room that we're actually keep it off of there. And again, we heat wrapped everything to make it nice and protected from the heat sources there. Okay, now for the vacuum hookup on the wastegates, we're going to be using only the bottom nipple port here on the wastegate, the one that's closest to the manifold. We're going to connect a hose directly from that right here to the nipple on the turbo. And it's going to be the same on both sides for both turbos. You just go right from the turbo to the bottom port on the wastegate. And the passenger side over here is going to be a little bit tighter in terms of heat, because it's going to be kind of trapped. The vacuum line is going to be right up in this area with the manifold and the heat and the downpipe and everything going right over it. So this vacuum line we're going to go ahead and wrap up with some heat wrap, and we'll show you that here in just a second. All right, now for the vacuum line, anything small that you're going to be heat wrapping, it's really hard to wrap something this small and kind of get it, tight up on there and looking real nice. So what we're actually going to do is we're going to staple it around it. So what you want to do is put the vacuum line in it. We're going to fold it over, basically just like that. And then we'll come back with just a regular stapler and actually staple it on there. You want to kind of make sure you get it all situated up in there so it looks nice. And get it pushed back as far as you can. That way the heat wrap is wrapped nice and tight on it. And that way it's got a nice, clean, tight wrap on the heat wrap. So when we put it up in there, that's going to protect this. We really don't want this vacuum line especially being exposed to heat and burning a hole in it. If it does, your boost is actually going to go out of control and it's going to go too high. And we really don't want that. So this is one of the most important lines to protect. All right, now you can see we got the vacuum line connected up to the wastegate. So it's basically, like I said, just going from that nipple there right down to the bottommost nipple. And again, the top nipple here, we don't want to use that. We don't want to plug it, we just want to leave it open for just running the base 7 psi on the wastegates here. If you're running a boost controller, especially electronic dual port or 3-port boost controller, consult the boost controller manufacturer as far as how to install it and how to use both ports. We're going to have the same thing right over here on the passenger side. We're just going from the connection here on the turbo, coming right down, and you can see it's all heat wrapped up to the connection on the wastegate there, and again on the bottom port. All right, the next thing we're going to go after is installing the downpipes. You can see we've already installed this one. It's fairly straightforward. They're just going to V-band clamp up right to the back of the turbo there. This one here on the driver's side, it's going to go just under the power steering lines here, and it's going to cross over and right around the steering shaft. You can see it comes just this side of the steering shaft, and it's going to loop back across the frame and bolt right down to its factory location there. Pretty similar over here on the passenger side. We're just going to V-band clamp it right here. It's going to drop down. It's going to swing outwards around the manifold, and then we just tie into our existing exhaust and downpipe right here. And this is designed to mate up to the factory exhaust. However, we do highly recommend a dual 3-inch exhaust system. That way you get the most flow out of it. Because we are running 3-inch downpipes, so you don't want to bottleneck it up here. Like I said, it will work with the factory system, but it'll work much better if you have a full 3-inch exhaust. All right, now for the oil feed assembly, what we're going to be doing is we're going to use this sandwich block here, and we're going to attach our 1/8-inch NPT to 90-degree 4AN fitting to it like that. And right down by the oil filter, there is an oil cooler housing, or there's a cap on it. Basically, we're just going to remove that, slide this into place, and then bolt it back in there. And this is going to kind of sandwich up in there. So we'll show you what that looks like once we get it installed. All right, now to route the oil lines, we're going to connect. Our first line is going to be the one with the straight and the 45-degree fitting on it. That's going to bolt right here to our sandwich plate with the straight fitting. And then we're just going to run that right up next to the engine here and shooting right up towards our top turbo. All right, and then under the turbo, just coming up, hugging the engine. We're going to come right with that line up, and then the 45-degree end is going to attach right here to our T. This is a male-female T that's going to go right onto the turbo, and what we're doing is we're just going to be daisy chaining the turbo together. So we're going to come up and we're going to feed the first turbo, and then it's going to tee off, daisy chain, and go over and feed the second turbo. So again, it's the line with the 45 and the straight. That's going to be the first line that's going to feed our driver's side here, and we're just going to go into our T fitting just like that. We're going to come off the T fitting with our second 4AN line with a straight fitting. That's going to go over, right over the top of the alternator, drop down below the throttle body, and come back right over here with the 90-degree fitting, feeding the passenger side turbo. All right, now to route the oil return lines, you can see we've already mounted them in here, so that way we can just kind of go over the routing with you and show you what it looks like. The longest one's going to go over here on the driver's side, and the one that's slightly shorter than that is going to go right over here on the passenger side. And you can see we're coming off with the 45-degree angle on both of them, right off the turbo. The other end down below, which we'll show you in just a minute, is where the straight section goes. So we're going to come off both the turbos. We're going to taper forward just a little bit on both of these. And basically what we're after is we're going to come off the turbo, we're going to drop forward and around and come right down in here, and we're going to make a made up. Basically, we're going just behind the radiator and the fan shroud here. All right, now you can see the driver's side coming down here, and the passenger side one dropping from here, and they're going to tee together with the T-union fitting here. And again, both of the straight sections are going to be what goes on the T side. The 45s are what go on the turbo. So we're just going to tee those together, and then coming off of the T, we have the 30-degree angle, and then that's going to go into a straight right there into the oil pan. Now, as we do this, you want to make sure that the oil line is in a constant downward motion. All right, now as this roots down, like I said, we want to have a constant downward slope. So you can see this is actually dropping down and then coming back up at this T section. That won't work. This needs to be up like that. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to drill a little hole right here in the bottom of the fan shroud, and we're going to use a zip tie to position this into place like that, because the whole entire way it needs to be constantly going down. If it comes down and then dips back up, it's going to create a puddle where the oil sits in the oil line, and it's not going to drain properly. At that point, you'll have problems with the oil actually backing up into the turbos, and then you'll start to see it smoking profusely, and we definitely don't want that. So we're going to go ahead and make sure that both of these are free flowing downward, and then once we get done, this last section here, you can see the 45 is facing slightly down, and it's got a slight downward trajectory going right there into the oil pan. And that's basically how it should be once we get done. So we'll go ahead and get this zip tied up out of the way. Alright, now here you can see as the oil return line's coming down, and we've got it going into the pan, we got it secured right up here with the zip ties going into the bottom of the radiator fan shroud. So we just put a couple holes in there, tie it up, and again, that's going to make it so that way it's all sloping downward. So we want downward slope here and then downward slope there going back into the pan, as well as downward slope coming from the passenger side over here. So everything's got to be sloped downward to the T, and then from the T downward into the pan itself. Alright, now we're going to go ahead and install the intercooler on here and the intercooler piping. So what we need to do first, now we got the grill and that off, is we're going to go ahead and unbolt the tranny cooler here, the tranny oil cooler. We're just going to drop that down out of the way. We're going to relocate that in here in a little bit. Then we're going to go ahead and take the intercooler itself, and we want to position it with the two side end tanks facing up and this one facing down. And we're going to drop it right into this area here, and you can see it bottoms out, and it'll actually rest on the two frame rails. What we're going to do is we want to raise it up some, and these two holes in the middle of the slotted ones right here on both sides, we're going to position that until that comes in alignment on both sides with these crossbars that are going down. So we're going to hold this up here and here, and we're going to go ahead and make our marks on that crossbar. Now it's not going to sit fully flush against that crossbar. You're going to have to hold it out towards the front about a ½ inch, but what we're going to do is make a little bit of mark on each of the crossbars. Next thing we're going to do is go ahead and pull this cross-sectional support here out for the radiator support. It's got 2 bolts right on the back side of here, and then it's got 2 bolts on each side. We're going to go ahead and pull that out. We're going to drill the holes out where we put our marks in it, and then we're going to take our M10 1.5 by 50 millimeter bolts, and we're actually going to slide them through backwards. The reason for that is that way we don't have, as we're tightening this up, we're not taking the bolt and jamming it up into our AC condenser here. The only thing we'll have protruding out the back side is the head of the bolt, and there's more than enough room on there. So we're going to take a M10 bolt with a washer. We'll go ahead and slide that back through there, and then we'll put this back into place, because once you get this in there, you won't be able to get the actual bolt in there. The bolts are a little bit too long. So we'll go ahead and do that right now, and then we'll show you what it looks like from there. Alright, now you can see here we got the intercooler mounted, and again, we're using the M10 1.5 by 50 millimeter bolt with the nut, and that's coming through the backwards facing out towards the front. And then we just go ahead and put the bolt on it there, and again, same thing over on this side here. And so what we'll end up with is the intercooler mounted right about there. So it's going to be, should be just hanging slightly below where the hood latch bracket is right here. Alright, now we're going to show you basically how we're routing up the intercooler piping. It's easiest that we just bolt it on here and then kind of show you exactly how it's laid out. So coming right off the turbo, this is going to be a 2-inch coupler. Now for those of you guys with the bigger 6182R turbos, this is going to be a 2.5 to 2-inch reducer. And then we're going right into our 2-inch pipe. And this is going to be the longer of the 2-inch pipes. It's got a 90 degree, a 45, and then a 90. The 45 with the shorter 90 is going to be back on this side. And then we're going to come right up through here. Now on both sides here, you can see we've trimmed it out a little bit. On the back side there is this rubber felt mat that we're pushing. Basically what we do is we just put an X in that with a razor blade, and that allows it to spread open so that way the piping can come through it. But there is a little bit of plastic here that we've actually cut away as well, and we're just going to trim that so we want enough routing for the intercooler pipe to come through there. The passenger side over here is going to be very much similar. Now we're coming off of the turbo here, and we've got a 90-degree 2-inch, and again for the bigger turbos it'll be a 2.5-inch to 2-inch with a 90-degree bend. That's going to come right into our long 90 here and goes right into the intercooler. Now for the intercooler side on both of these, this is just going to be a 2-inch to 2.5-inch reducer that goes right in there, and then the corresponding V-band clamps, of course. Now coming out the bottom, we'll show you that here. Alright, and underneath, looking at the bottom side of the intercooler, we're going to come off with a 90-degree 3-inch bend that's going to face over towards the passenger side. The pipe's just going to continue on. This is our U-bend pipe. It's going to go underneath the radiator core support. So to come off with it facing towards the passenger side, and then it just dips down and goes under the core support here, and then we come up to a 3-inch pipe facing outward towards the passenger side. Alright, so we came out of the intercooler, we looped under the frame rail, we shot up. This is our 90-degree facing towards the passenger side as we come in through the passenger side wheel well here. And then we're going to attach that to our long 90-degree bend, which goes up. And that's going to go right here to our 3-inch to 4-inch 45-degree coupler, so it's going to come up and kick back at a 45-degree angle. And then the big 4-inch upper intercooler pipe here. This one's got our blow-off valve on it. We'll show you that in just a second. And comes right across the top of the engine here, down into a 90-degree 4-inch bend that's going to go right to the throttle body. Now the 4-inch bend is going to come a little bit long. You might have to trim it down a little bit. That way you have enough clearance room between the fan shroud and the intercooler pipe. So just use a razor blade and cut the back side of it so it's a little bit shorter right in this section. So we took off a little section right in here that slips it up a little bit shorter. And that's basically what it should look like there. Alright, the blow-off valve is fairly simplistic. Again, it's much like the wastegates where it'll actually have 2 ports on it. So one of them is going to get the nipple here that comes off, and this is our vacuum line that we attach to the intake manifold right over here that we showed you earlier. The other one is just going to get a plug in it, so as you rotate it you can swivel this around 360 degrees. Basically one of them gets a plug, one gets a vacuum line. Make sure that the second one is plugged up, otherwise the blow-off valve will not operate properly. And then there's just V-band clamps right onto our intercooler pipe here. There is a small rubber O-ring that will come in the kit with the blow-off valve here. Make sure that sits right down on the base of the flange, and then put the blow-off valve on, and then we clamp it down tight. Alright, now for the last upper intercooler pipe that we're going to be doing, you'll notice there's no room for your traditional existing MAF. And that's because we're going to be actually replacing it with the card style later model LS7 MAF. Now this is just going to slide right into the existing bung that's on there, and you just bolt it down. Now it does only go in one way, so you can't actually put it in backwards, because if you do, the bolt holes won't line up. In addition to that, we're going to have this adapter here that's going to plug onto there, and then it'll plug into your existing wiring where your MAF was already, or where your existing MAF was before. It will plug right into this, so this is going to adapt it over so you can use the new MAF. Alright, now we're going to prepare the transmission cooler for those of you guys that have it. Basically what we're going to do is pull this out. We're going to cut the lines, and we want to use an actual pipe cutting tool to cut the lines. Don't want to use a cutoff wheel or sawzall, because that's going to introduce metal shavings into it, and we don't want to be running that through the transmission. Plus that makes it a much smoother, cleaner cut for when we go to flare it a little bit later. So we'll go ahead and cut those, and you want to cut it basically right at the end of the straight before it bends and starts going up into the rest of the hard line. Aside from that, we have this bracket here that was on the top section, and we're just going to use a cutoff wheel, cut that off there. And then this bracket here was mounted on there, and it's basically just riveted on, so we just grind the head of the rivets off, this bracket pops off, and then this is how we're going to mount it using the factory brackets that are attached to the transmission cooler here using the sheet metal screws. And this is going to go in here, and we'll bolt it up right to the bottom of the radiator core support. We'll show you what that looks like here in just a second. Alright, now to prepare these for the hoses that we're going to attach to it, we're going to put a double flare on it. That's going to act basically as a bead roll because we're going to put the hose over it and hose clamp it down. So what you want to do is using a normal standard double flaring tool. This is the same thing that we use on like brake lines and that. We're going to go ahead and flare out any of the places that we've cut it, which are going to be both of these here, and then we'll show you in just a second underneath the truck where we're going to cut on the other side of the line. So there's actually a chunk of line that we're taking out completely. We're going to double flare the other side as well, so that way we could just attach a hose between the two sections, and the hose won't slip off with the pressure. It'll actually be held on there. Alright, now looking up under inside the truck here, you can see right here where we've cut one of the training lines, and then we went ahead and double flared on the end of it already. And then the other one is going to be the one that's coming down right here from the radiator. And again, we went ahead and cut and got our double flare up on there already. So these are going to be our two training lines that we're going to attach. And then right up here, basically right behind the radiator, we're going to screw the transmission cooler right into the radiator core support here. Alright, now looking up at the bottom right here towards the intercooler, we see we got the transmission cooler mounted, and again just the two sheet metal screws right there, and they're just screwing right into the radiator core support. And then it's got the transmission lines facing down here on both of them. We're just going to wrap those and route those back up to our transmission line there, and to our second line that's coming down from right up in there. And we're just going to use the 3/8" hose that comes with the kit, along with the hose clamps to tighten it down. One of these, you have a total of 4 foot. One of them cut to 31 inches, the other one cut to 17 inches. And that'll give you the lengths that you need. And then the inner one here, or the passenger side, is going to go towards the radiator one, and then the driver's side is going to go right here going back to the transmission. They should be about the length that you need, and then we're just going to route them right over here next to this intercooler piping. That way it clears the skid shield here once we go to put that back on. Alright, now to reinstall the skid shield, you'll notice the intercooler piping over here is going to be in the way, so we're going to need to actually trim that up. Now if you look at this side here, it used to contour like this. Basically we're going to cut right straight up there on the passenger side, and that's what we've done here. You can see we just cut straight up, and then we contour it over so that way it still goes up under the radiator, and we just basically trimmed a little L shape out of it right here, and that's going to allow for our transmission cooler lines and for our intercooler piping here to dive down and go back up into it. So when you get done, it should look about like that. Alright, now to reroute the heater core lines, they're going to be coming right off of the firewall there, and then they come up in the front. We're actually going to cut those a little bit short, and we're going to add these on. These come with the kit as the extension. Now, these 90-degree ends here are actually going to go onto the engine side over here. And then these are going to come, and we'll show you how they're orientated in there in a minute, but it gives us a nice sharp 90-degree bend coming off the engine, and then we're going to route it a little bit forward to get it out of the way of the heat of the turbo, and then back up to where they go. Now, these in themselves will not be long enough, so what we're actually going to do is reuse the back section going to the firewall of the heater lines that are already in there. That also allows us to retain the fitting that's on the back of it where it actually plugs and snaps into the firewall. So we're going to connect the two of them together using the sharp bite fitting, and basically it'll just splice the two together. So this will plug in like this, we'll hose clamp it, it'll plug into the other end of the line and hose clamp it. So what we're going to do start is actually disconnect the lines that are in there existing from the engine, set them aside, and then plug these in and get these routed up so that they're in a nice way situated out of the way of all the heat. Bring them up to the other lines, find out how much of the other line we're going to have to cut. We'll cut the other line so it's flush with this one. We'll install the splice fitting, and then these will attach right to the factory lines going to the firewall, and these will attach right to the engine block itself. So we'll show you what that looks like once we get it installed. Alright, now the two radiator heater core lines that are going back, one of those has actually got this line from the coolant reservoir tapping right into it. So what we're going to do is we're going to be relocating that line over into the main lower radiator hose, and we're going to be doing that with this T-fitting here. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to cut the lower radiator hose, slide this in place, and then we're going to cut that line coming from the reservoir, and that's going to attach to right here. So you can see we've got everything up in here still. what we're going to do is we're going to come in right in here and this lower radiator hose and make a cut. That's going to install this right here with 2 clamp on each side. And then as this one's coming up near it here, we're going to go ahead and cut that, and that's going to install right there again with a clamp. So we're reusing the hoses that are already in there, both the lower radiator hose as well as the hose coming off of the coolant reservoir, and we're just relocating where it's tapping into. Instead of going to the heater core line, it's going to be tapping into the lower main radiator hose with this. Alright, now you can see right in here we've got the lines attached to the engine. We went ahead and heat wrapped them while we had them out of the car as well. Makes it much easier to deal with when they're out of the car. And coming right from the engine there. And then you can see we've got them rooting from the engine. They come up actually in the front. That way they're away from the turbo and the turbine housing, and back here with the heat. We're not just coming up with them and going over, which is what the factory ones did. So we're actually shooting these off, coming off the engine, shooting forward at a 90-degree angle, and then we're going to loop it with the excess back up here and right back into our firewall fittings there. And you can see the actual fittings themselves where we spliced it together are right about here. So we're using this part here is going to be the factory line. We're going to splice it right here, and then this part of the line is the hose that actually comes with the kit. And then, like I said, again, we went ahead and heat wrapped it. That way, as it does pass by the turbine housing in that here, it's plenty enough out of the way. We got a lot of room, but we also keep it heat protected as well. All right, now we're going to need to relocate or replace the AC line that we took out previously, and that's going from the canister back on the firewall down to the AC compressor. And for that, we're going to use specially made AC adapters. So on the existing AC line, this piece here will actually match the end of your line. When you pulled it off, there should be a gasket on the bottom side of this. If you want to go ahead and remove that from the factory one, slide it over here before we reinstall it. These are going to bolt back onto where the AC line came off of, using the factory nuts and bolts. Before we stick that on, we're going to go ahead and go ahead and thread in. It's our 3/8 inch to 90 degree to -10AN adapter, and we're going to use some Teflon tape on there. We'll thread these on, and then these will actually bolt in place where the factory AC line was. That's going to allow us to switch it over to a -10AN style fitting, and we're going to run that as our AC line, and that way we can reroute it out of the way. Alright, now here you can see we've got our fitting that's bolted up where our AC line was, and again we're coming out with a 90-degree fitting. Now on this one, the 90-degree fitting is facing almost completely 180 degrees away from the bolt or the nut hole where it goes in. So we bolted this up using the factory hardware, and then we're just going to come off with the 90-degree fitting. And then this is going to be our -10AN line with the 45s on it. It's going to do a 45 to point it towards the front of the car. We're going to come well away from the turbo and the housing and all the heat over here next to the coolant reservoir, and then that's going to loop right back down there. And then you can see it coming in right here, and we do a 45-degree bend backwards towards the rear of the vehicle, and again a 90-degree fitting right here going into another one of our adapters. Now that one's going to be basically at a 90-degree angle from where the bolt is here. It's going to be facing sideways. So one of them is going to be facing 180 out, and the other one is going to be facing basically 90 degrees forward. And then go ahead and install the line itself, snug those up tight. Again, the NPT side on the bottom here where it's going into the fitting, that will need Teflon tape. The top side with the AN line does not. Alright, that about finishes it up for the install on this. Now all we have left to do is go ahead and put it on the dyno and tune it. Now of course we do recommend having this professionally dyno tuned by somebody who really is experienced and is qualified and knows what they're doing. So let's go ahead and get this thing on the dyno and make some power.